It's the Eagle Community Television Forum with your host, Gary Shorman.
You're watching ECTV. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman, and our guest on the forum today is Travis Couture Lovelady, a state representative. Travis, thanks for coming in and joining us again today.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
It's always good to get you and talk to you a little bit about what's happening in the state legislature. And I know this year you had a few extra days, so you had some time on your hands, and you guys just wanted to stay together and bond for a while, didn't you?
Not quite. I was definitely happy to show Topeka my taillights, that's for sure.
Well, you and probably all the other state representatives and senators as well.
Absolutely.
Now, that was kind of a tough and trying time for you guys this year, and a lot of people that are watching don't realize what actually goes on in Topeka. One of the things that I know that goes on, and maybe you can address that, the length of the session this year.
Sure.
Now, this year was a little bit longer, but last year was shorter.
Yeah.
And they kind of offset a little bit because in Kansas, they work on a 2-year budget. Maybe address that a little bit and how that works.
Sure, yeah, the past, I guess it was started 3 years ago, we started doing 2-year budget cycles. So the byproduct of that has been to take the regular 90-day session and it extends it the first year. 2 years ago it was 105, but last year it was back down to 79, and this year we went 112. When we were doing budgets every year, it would go over the 90 days, just not to that I guess historic level, you could say. And we had that plus having to deal with a tax plan and a tax issue that really made it a tough session this year. But I'm confident that we'll be under the 180 total for the 2-year cycle, and I think next year we'll trim that back off because it does cost the state money, and we're mindful of that. As you go over 90 days, you have to have staff, you have to pay legislators, you have to pay for all the support systems that make the process work, revisor's office, those sorts of things. And so there is a cost to it, but I'm confident, and I think the Speaker of the House and Senate President have already said that we're going to do our best to try and cut the extra days off of next year so that it's a neutral cost to the state.
Well, with those overruns and costs and such, wouldn't it be, maybe you've heard this too from people, maybe the voting people out there, wouldn't it be probably more productive if you would just go back to doing budgets once a year, like a typical business or somebody in their household would do it once a year?
Well, the thing about that is the good part about the 2-year budget is it gives certainty. It gives certainty for schools, it gives certainty for government agencies. They're able to plan out a little further so that they can dig a little deeper in other parts of the budget, and that goes for the Appropriations Committee as well. I mean, we're there from a short period of time. The subcommittees and then the full Appropriations Committee only has a month and a half to dig deep into those agency budgets, and that's not very much time. So if you have their budget set, then the next year you can come in and go a little deeper and say, all right, does this really need to happen? I know you said in the previous years you've gotten this much money for this program, but I see you're also doing this, and it's essentially the same function, so can't we work ways to make that more efficient? And that's impossible to do in the regular cycle where you're doing a budget every year.
There's a lot of people in the education sector, and I guess everywhere working with the state with the furloughs this year. Boy, that was really scaring a lot of people. I don't know if you heard comments about that, maybe got some emails on that.
Oh, we definitely did. And I'm disappointed it came to that. It never should have even gotten close to that, but I didn't think furloughs were ever a real threat. I think it was a move by the administration to push the legislature to come to an end.
And it didn't seem to work too well at first.
Well, we found a way to make sure that employees weren't furloughed and then went back to the work at hand. I think it was just an unfortunate sidetrack in the process.
Now, in this last session, we heard a lot about the furloughs. We heard a lot about state legislators going over on time. Let's maybe get into some happier thoughts now. Let's talk about some of the great things that maybe you did accomplish in this last legislative session that might be beneficial to the people out there.
Well, we're definitely talking Hayes area specific. Fort Hayes was definitely a beneficiary of this budget and this process. They're going to do very well, and it was important for us to fight to make sure that they were at an adequate funding level, that they're able to continue to expand and grow like they have been. One thing that was troubling a few years ago was there was an across-the-board cut to higher ed. That seems to be the shortcut way that Topeka tends to cut budgets, and that's a horrible way to do it, especially for those good actors like Fort Hays. I mean, I feel like they're a really good steward of our taxpayer money and use it very efficiently for higher education, whereas some of the other institutions, I would say they're not quite as efficient as Fort Hays is. So when you cut 2% across the board, and that doesn't go just for Fort Hays, it goes for a number of government agencies. So there is no incentive for them to do their job more efficiently. Because if you get 2% off of your bloated overhead, well, that's not a whole lot of a cut then. But if you're 2% off of what you actually need to survive and administer your government services, your responsibility in a responsible way, then you're really cutting into the ability to do your job. So I am not a fan of across-the-board cuts, and that's really something we need to try to avoid going forward if there are further budget problems.
How do you get that across to other legislators? Do you have this fighting that goes on between parties, or how do you get that across to other people, or you just wait for another election and see what happens?
Well, it all depends. It's not just parties. I mean, there's all across the board, and people have different feelings on how that works. Some think that well, across the board's better than nothing, so we'll just do that. And in some cases, unfortunately, it does become a last resort, because of the time frame that we're stuck with. We are a part-time legislature. We're not there year-round, and so, like I said, our ability to truly understand what these agencies need to administer their services efficiently and effectively is really cut short by the time frame. So one thing that was in the final package that passed this year was a study commission to get an outside auditor to come into the state, and they've someone with experience. I know North Carolina, Ohio are examples of other states that have done this, that found significant savings in true efficiency, not just cutting across the board to everybody, but really finding duplication of programs and areas that have outlived their usefulness. And so that's a much better way. Get in there, cut the budget with a scalpel rather than just whacking it right off the top.
I've heard of that in Ohio, and they've done a very good job with that. What's some of the other programs in the state of Kansas that you can recall that maybe benefited from this year's budget, or maybe should rejoice a little bit?
Well, sure. I mean, it's a long session, so you try to think back on some of the stuff that was passed a long time ago. But with July 1st coming up, we've got all the new laws go into effect on July 1st. So there's a lot of things coming forward. Constitutional carry was a big one that was passed this year. So for Kansans, they don't have to have a permit from the Attorney General's office if they want to carry concealed in the state.
When you get to something like the weapons issues, and you get a lot of people that are really passionate about that, either way, do you get a lot of lobbyists that are thrown into the mix too and come your way? And,
oh yeah.
And how do you deal with all of that too?
Well, it certainly becomes more of a challenge. You know, we don't have much of a staff. I share one assistant with Representative Boldra, and so he answers the phone for us and takes down messages, but we all deal with our own emails and do our own research. And so I think for the constitutional carry, when I was on the committee, I was the lead sponsor of the bill in the House, I carried the bill on the floor, so my inbox on that issue was way over full. So I had probably 5,000 in a week on that issue once it came up to the full House. So trying to answer those is a challenge, and trying to weed out the ones that have constituent questions or concerns or need help with a different agency. It takes a little while, so it was a little tougher this year. And
when are you up for re-election next time?
Next year.
Next year. Now, the reason why I'm asking that is because when you're up for re-election, or maybe you're going to run for a while, are there things in your head that you plan out a little bit ahead of time and say, the next time I'm in the next session, I'm going to talk about this. I really want to bring this to the floor. I really want to work on this. Do you do that? Do you plan that out in your head a little bit?
Not so much. I mean, we're a part-time legislature, so it's really hard to plan that sort of thing. I mean, you never know. Some folks have these bills they've been working on for 10 years, and then next thing you know, bam, it just clicks at the right time and goes through. Or you get a new idea and you throw it out there the first time and it goes through.
Or somebody's out there and they're working on something, and then all of a sudden they're voted out of office.
Or that. So you don't want to take the chance of your issue. Maybe it's a good idea and everybody thinks it's a good idea, but they don't have the passion for it that you do, and they're not going to push it as hard as you will. So I'm more the thinking, if you're there, go for it. Just just push as hard as you can. And
Are you one of those that has to travel back and forth a lot, or do you stay there in the apartment during the term?
I stay at the Ramada Apartments there.
Oh, okay.
But I do come home every weekend because.
Well, yeah, you've got a family, so you
Yeah,
do
so
that.
it takes a little more time, but straight shot on I-70, so it's not that bad of a drive.
Well, we've talked a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff that happened in the state legislature this year, and I don't want to run out of this show without asking you some questions that might happen on a federal level and how they work with the state level. So we'll get into that in the second half of the show, because you've worked on the federal level and you've worked on the state level. So I'm going to get your take on some of those hot button issues that are kind of coming our way.
Excellent.
And we'll get to that in the second half of the show. Again, this is The Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman this week. The show brought to you by Hayes Med.
Hayes Med is your first and best choice for healthcare. They're the only facility providing tertiary level services in this region. With more than 70 physicians and 26 specialties ranging from heart, orthopedic, spine care, cancer, obstetrics and gynecology, wound care, rehabilitation and surgery, including the Da Vinci robotic surgery, Hayes Med is your comprehensive health provider for people throughout Western Kansas. Hayes Med, helping people be healthy.
It's a beautiful day in our super high-speed internet great customer service neighborhood. Like you, this is where we live. In fact, our company is employee-owned, so it's our goal to improve the quality of life for everyone in our community by delivering faster, more reliable internet, clearer, more feature-laden phone service, quality TV channels, all with the level of customer service you'd expect from people who are your neighbors. Eagle Communications. Our community connected.
You're watching the ECTV Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman this week. By the way, if you've got questions or comments, Gary would love to hear from you, even show ideas. It's gary.shorman@eaglecom.net. The Forum again brought to you by Hayes Med. And today with me, it's Travis Couture Lovelady, a representative for the state of Kansas. And you know, one of the things that, Travis, you talked about in the first half of the show is all the little things, the cogs and the wheels that go on in the state legislature. But then we also think that there's a federal level out there too. A lot of stuff coming down the pike over the last few weeks and coming down right now from the Supreme Court. Now, when the Supreme Court's in session, or federal level, when something comes down from the federal level, sometimes you have to make changes on a state level too. I know that recently we've had the gay marriage issue. You've got the weapons issue as well. How do those affect you, and how do they come into play as a state legislator?
Sure. Well, they certainly can be game changers. The Obamacare decision that was last week, it could have really changed things. If they would have struck down the subsidies, we would have had a whole bunch of folks that were mandated to have insurance but had no government subsidy to help them pay for it. So a lot of poor folks that couldn't afford their insurance would suddenly be without the Obamacare subsidy, and that would have probably come to the state to make up that difference.
Right, and that's where I was going to go with my next question here. If that does come to the state, then all of a sudden you've got to figure out where you're going to get that money all of a sudden.
Yeah.
That could have been really, I guess, terrible.
Yeah, with our budget situation, it would have been really terrible. And so you've got that issue. You've got the fact that our constitutional amendment that says marriage, one man, one woman, has essentially been struck down by the Supreme Court at this point. That changes things. Where I guess the administration is looking into how that is going to be implemented and what to do going forward to strike a balance between that and the religious freedoms that we've kind of struggled with the past few years as we saw this coming. Another big decision just came out was with the EPA, which is a great decision. I know the Attorney General has been fighting hard for us on that to push back on some of their rules that would have shut down a lot of our coal-fired power plants in this state and cut off our ability to set base load power. So that's a good decision that came out of the Supreme Court. And
I know the other states have the same issues too. I think California with that EPA was looking at that as well.
Yeah, and there was the property rights issue with the Supreme Court where the raisin farmers had to give up half of their, it was a twist on eminent domain where they had to give up half of their crop to the federal government, and the Supreme Court struck that down. So it's been quite the transformational week coming out of the Supreme Court.
Sure, you've got immigration issues as well that are coming down from a federal level too, and I just kind of wonder how that kind of affects the state, and do you guys have rumblings and you talk about it when you're down in the legislature and kind of worry about how you're going to fit that all into everything?
Certainly, we have to be mindful of it and prepare as best we can either way. So, I mean,
Let's go back to the Obamacare thing. Let's say that came down, and the way you didn't want it to come down, or the state didn't want it to come down because it would have cost so much money. What happens? Does the state legislature go back into like a session again and try to figure out how to come up with that money, or what do they do? Or does the government subsidize it for a little while to help states kind of get back up to speed?
no one really knew.
Okay.
Talked to Congressman Heelskamp about it a week and a half ago, and they talked about how the speaker and the leadership team in D.C. was trying to find some sort of solution if that did happen, and it didn't. But now, unfortunately, we're still stuck with Obamacare.
So we have a lot of those decisions that do come down from a federal level, and you guys have to be aware of that. Did you think of all these things when you were running for office, that all these things could happen when you ran for office?
Well, no, I'd be lying if I did. You never can predict all these things, and I'm learning something new every day in Topeka, and especially it is a transformational time in our country, good and bad. You're seeing a lot of things that people really are happy of happening, and I guess for the other side they're not happy. So it's interesting to watch and interesting to be a part of, at least on the state level in Topeka.
Well, I know you've worked for the state level, and then you worked kind of on a federal level too. You've worked in campaigns for Heelskamp. You've worked in Brownback's office, Moran's office. So you've worked around on a federal level too. Right. Is there some things that you see different on a federal level as opposed to a state level? Probably more staffers on a federal level.
Well, it's a lot of the same issues. If you're talking specifically, the focus issue was all on budgets and government agencies and how do we make sure they're funded. Well, it's the same issues in Topeka. It's just a lot bigger scale in D.C. And I would feel like a lot of our agencies run very efficiently. A lot of them don't, and it's not necessarily always that case when you're talking D.C. D.C., I would say the whole thing is probably way overbloated.
Yeah, so a lot more lobbying that happens, a lot of high pressure lobbying happens there, and you really have to make friends there to try to get people to go for your hot button or your passionate issues, don't you?
Certainly. It's all part of it. I mean, like everything in life, it's about personal relationships. You can be the smartest guy in the room with the best ideas, and if you're not friendly enough to make positive relationships with your colleagues, you're not going to get a dang thing done.
Well, very good. I appreciate you coming in and talking to us today, and I know there's a lot of stuff that you have to do. And then you also have told us that you're almost guaranteeing that it's going to be a shorter session next year. Almost guaranteed.
Almost. I'm saying it right. If nothing changes, that'll be the plan. But
well, very good. Now, if people want to write you or they've got some issues they want to talk about, you're always open to that. How can they get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Got my email, which is travis@travis4kansas, forkansas.com. You can find that on my website or on Facebook. Just Travis Couture Lovelady on Facebook. I'm pretty responsive on there too, as best I can. So.
Well, very good. Well, thanks again for coming in and being our guest today. Again, State Representative Travis Couture Lovelady, our guest today on the forum. I'm Mike Kerner, in for Gary Shorman. And the show today brought to you by HaysMed. Thank you for being with us.
HaysMed is your first and best choice for healthcare. They're the only facility providing tertiary level services in this region. With more than 70 physicians and 26 specialties ranging from heart, orthopedic, spine care, cancer, obstetrics and gynecology, wound care, rehabilitation and surgery, including the Da Vinci robotic surgery, HaysMed is your comprehensive health provider for people throughout Western Kansas. HaysMed, helping people be healthy.